Now it's time to bind the armholes, and we're doing that exactly the same as we did the neckline. We're using the matte side of the binding to bind it. Normally you put together the right sides, and this time we put together the wrong sides, or the fabric underside, and we're sewing it across with a foot width seam allowance. Iron the seams apart, small seams anyway, but you do want to cut them back regardless, because anything that creates bulk is not nice. So we're going to cut them back to about 3 millimeters, really nice and sharpish. And after that, I'm going to iron the bias binding lengthways in half. And now I'm going to mark the bias binding, the center, where we have got our seam, and then the opposite side. And that will align with the shoulder seam and the underarm seam. So I'm going to pin my bias binding to the armhole now, and we're pinning it to the wrong side of the fabric. And then we align the shoulder seam with the other marking. And you can see that it'd be lovely and slim up here. Really, really nice actually. There we go. You can pin it more. I didn't do it here. I'm just going to do it like this because there isn't really that much stretch in the fabric. So you want to turn the dress so that you're working from the inside. It's always easier to do that. And then you line up the edge of the presser foot with the bias binding, and you go all the way around. And you just move the fabric with your left hand into position and then just hold it. Make sure that it doesn't slip underneath it. And the distance here is not so important because we are cutting that part back. Important is that the distance between the edge of the bias binding and the stitching line remains the same, so that the presser foot is lined up on that edge. That's what's really important. You can see it here really well. It sits right on it. This is nice. Right, and then once we've done that and we've come all the way up, we do the same to the other armhole, of course, and then we compare them, because you might have got it wrong, and as you will see now, I actually did. And as you can see here, one side is much slimmer than the other, and that's simply because my fabric must have slipped when I was cutting it out. If you start your fabric, this is not going to happen. But because I didn't, and it's really slippery stuff, this silk satin, I need to unpick it. So don't just leave stuff when you have this. Just go in there and unpick it. And here's my little trick for unpicking. You just loosen the thread in one area, and then you pick up the thread and literally rip it. And if you do it really fast, you won't damage your fabric. And if you use a quick unpick, it's so much easier to, run it into the fabric. This is how we did it when I was training. We were never allowed to use quick unpicks for the reason that they cause more damage usually than they help you out, So just use your fingers. And now I'm going to put this over, and you can see, oh my goodness, that, what it does. I've really come in here. So I've pinned it so that it sits where it needs to sit, and re-sewed it. And that was worthwhile doing because now they are the same. Of course, you have to check, put them inside of each other, and then just go and see whether you've got the right distance now. And I do, so I can cut back my seam allowance again down to about 3 millimeters, and then we're going to understitch this. So we're sewing our top onto the bias binding. The very same way we did before with the neckline. There we are. Pull the fabric apart. Excellent stuff. And just do this all the way around. You now know how to do that. Just don't pull the fabric into any vertical direction, just horizontally apart. There we go, all done. Now I can roll my binding over to cover the stitching and the rough edge. And you can see how beautifully slim that will be. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. So let's go and sew this in. Stitch length should be 3, and we want to stitch right on the edge of that bias binding. Fold over the binding. Smooth the fabric with your left hand, and then sew right along it. Find that fixed point on the sewing machine, and for me it's just the start of that little bit of plastic on the left hand side of the foot. That's where I line it up, and I do look at the needle here once in a while. I sort of flick in between it so that I get it right. And I do that all the way around. And also I've now got a little Amazon shop, so that if you wanted to see what kind of sewing machine I recommend, I actually recommend a Janome on there, simply because Amazon, number one, doesn't sell fluff. Fluff is also very expensive. So if you're looking for a more budget model, I would recommend the Janome that I have on there, because I used to work with that in my sewing classes I did for the Worcestershire County Council. We had about 12 of those, and the students actually liked them a lot, partly because you could adjust the speed of the machine. It's just a really easy machine for a beginner to use. So if you're looking for one, don't know which one to get, that certainly is a good one. Now we're going to iron nice and flat. And now I'm also going to iron it flat here. I think that's quite nice. Like I said, if you wanted to find fabrics I'm using and equipment I'm using, the Amazon shop now is there for you to use all those links to the products that I actually recommend and use myself. We just need to now do our little hem. All we do is overlock round the lower edge of the top, and then we turn it up. So if you already know how to do that, you can just leave this out.